Hello, how are we doing tonight? Woo! All right, how many people here went to the first part of Atheist Day? Woo! All right, excellent. So you know what's coming already. So a man who, what? All right. Hey, we're in a church, okay? So a man who basically needs no introduction, though I'll give him one anyway. Seth Andrews, former Christian broadcaster, and now he's turned that, well, not now, a while ago, he turned that around and now is the host of The Thinking Atheist. Please welcome Seth Andrews. You know him, you love him.
Okay, I want to make sure I've got audio on my PowerPoint before we proceed. Okay, good. It's a church, so they require a urine sample before you do any atheist stuff here. Actually, yeah, I hadn't drank any water all day. Aaron brought some beer. This is called Rumpkin, and I told him I think beer tastes like, or smells like feet. And so he brought me something to imbibe, probably hoping I would finish it on stage, and as your phone cameras were rolling, I would end up on, YouTube. Tonight, that's not going to happen. I got to thank the Atheist Community of Austin. Thank you so much for everything you have done to put today together. It's huge. It's amazing. Anybody else feel kind of weird being back in church? Like, I look around, I think of the material that I normally do and the people we are, and I look at the stained glass and all of this stuff, and it's like, this is a convergence of cultures that you just don't see every day. But, props to the church, because they're open-minded enough to allow us to come and have the kind of discussion we're going to have tonight and hang out together as non-religious people, and props to them. And I'm genuinely grateful to Trinity for hosting us tonight. Folks, my wife knows me, right? She knows me. I have a studio upstairs, top of the stairs, and when I come down the stairs, let's say she's been at the office or whatever, and she'll see a look on my face. Maybe my jaw's kind of set, and I'm kind of distracted, and I'm kind of doing some mumbling under my breath, and she'll just look at me, and she'll be like, honey, have you been arguing on the internet again? All right? And I will look her sincerely in the eye, and I will say, who, me? Right? Of course I've been arguing on the internet. That's why we have the internet. I fight. I'm like you, I fight for the cause of right. I fight. And when I see other people posting their nonsensical drivel, well, it's on them because they have chosen the method of their destructor, right? Yeah. We all know what it's like to get into an altercation of some kind on the internet, right? And we know the feeling that comes afterward, the feeling that we have vanquished a foe, right? That's how we feel when we win an argument on the internet. Now, I like to poke fun at people who argue a lot online, but I'm a total hypocrite because I've been guilty of doing it myself, sometimes getting sucked in and sometimes actually enjoying. And this is where things really get complicated. Social media is absolutely a valid way to express ourselves, to express who we are, what our values are, what we're interested in, all those types of things. And as we have seen recently, it's an effective tool. It can be an effective tool for positive social change, perhaps even saving lives. You remember the recent story with this Saudi woman? Rahaf Muhammad. If you haven't heard the story, here it is in a nutshell. She is live streaming on Twitter a life and death situation. She's holed up in a Bangkok airport. She's trying to escape a family, a devoutly Islamic family that has threatened her life because she's not leaving the family, she's also leaving Islam. She's an apostate. She's trying to get asylum in, I think, Australia at the time. She's barricaded herself in this Bangkok airport hotel. and she's waiting for them to bust through and drag her away, and likely she will be executed. At the very least, her life will be a living hell forever. And so she's on Twitter. And I was there, and people like Armin Navabi and Yasmin Mohammed and other people were there. Were all like retweeting and calling the embassies, and everybody else was. I'm not giving myself any credit. I'm saying that there was a lot of us online who had joined this. And then the media picked it up. The major news stations picked it up, and it exploded. And thanks to that, Raha was given asylum and protection in Canada 1 day later. That's cool. That's cool. Here's another example. This is just recent, happened a few days ago. Humane Society took some undercover cameras, some phone cameras in, and they discovered that Dow DuPont was using pesticides on beagles. They were force-feeding pesticides to beagles. And they took the video, posted it online, and the attention that it got when the story went viral caused Dow DuPont, Dow Agro to announce publicly that they are ceasing the practice. This is positive change because of social media. All right, I get it. I'm a living example of the power of social media. I live in Jesustown, USA. I live in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I don't know of any atheists in my family, certainly no one I'm close to. And so social media has allowed me to connect to you, and in that way you are my family. It's impossible without social media, but I'm also, as I'm seeing this connection that we have, this technology that's brought us together and hyper-connected us, I'm also noticing that in some ways as human beings it is disconnecting us as well. Any of you guys catching some of that? There's an isolating effect that's taking place as we talk not as much to people, but kind of at them. You know, we see not a flesh and blood human being like you sitting there, or you sitting there, or you sitting there, but I'm looking at a two-dimensional avatar, maybe not even your own face. Maybe I don't even know who you are beyond your first name or whatever your handle is. Looking through a smartphone display, trying to see the person, you're not going to see the person. Our perspectives get narrower. Our exchanges become less about actually communicating and interacting, and it becomes more about winning. It becomes more of an us versus them kind of thing. Us good, they bad. Now, I have to say this at the front end. My presentation, this conversation, is not about the legitimate examples of the extreme. I know there are some people who are going to take this and run with it and lose their minds and think I'm talking about, the mass shooter and the rapist and the predator and the absolute horror of a human being. That's not the target of this conversation today. Please resist the knee-jerk into the extreme, because that's really not what I want to talk about. Largely, I want to talk about us. How do we talk to each other in the social media world? And how often does it devolve into this kind of weird cage match? I could go on Twitter right now. I could pull my phone out right now. I could go on my social media, and I could make a reasonable statement about any hot topic that's important to people, that speaks to our values. Pick one, race, talk about the president, social justice issues, trans rights. Pick one. If it's not up here, you can have one of your own. I go out and I'll say something that's measured and calm and compassionate and reasonable. What almost immediately happens? This. You suck. You piece of garbage. You're too stupid to understand. Blah, 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 blah. And then the language gets worse, and it just devolves and devolves and devolves. If you haven't seen what these type of exchanges look like, there is a graphic that kind of depicts what it's like. Here, there's some sound with this too, so check it out. Enhance your calm. That's what I want for all of us. Just align your chakras and allow your vibrations to remain in the positives. Okay? Let us all commune together as one. Yes, there are awful human beings in the world, but maybe, just maybe, not everybody who we clash against out there deserves to be jammed into a swastika-shaped cookie cutter. Right? Who among us is not human? Who among us has not made a mistake? Who among us has not been wrong? Let us resist, my friends, these purity tests and the call-out culture and this weird oversimplification that people are doing with complex issues. Let's resist the mob desire to knee-jerk. You are wrong, and if you are wrong, then you are bad. And if you are bad, then you are trash. How many people have seen other people just calling other people trash, just casually online? You're garbage. He's garbage. She's garbage. What if we didn't do that? What if we didn't immediately hit the ceiling and toss gasoline on every spark? What if we handled it differently? I mean, we're all guilty of being wrong. I don't know if it's true, but it's a clever meme. It says, to be old and wise, you must first be young and stupid. Now, be honest, how many people in this room have ever been young and stupid? Oh my God, the rest of you are lying. Let me tell you a story. He doesn't know I'm sharing this story. I'm going to change his name for the purpose of the story. I'm going to call him Steve, all right? Steve and I had a lot in common. He was a couple years older than me in high school, but we were a lot alike. We had the same sense of humor. We were both kind of nerds. We both played keyboards, and we both loved these quirky horror movies. And so we had just rented on VHS tape, we'd rented the Sam Raimi classic, The Evil Dead, one of the greatest films in the history of all cinema. Anyway, we rented it, and we had a great time. And so I thought, since we both enjoyed a good prank, I thought, my unbelievably stupid teenage brain thought, wouldn't it be funny if one night after dark, and I'm driving by his house, I'll go up and I'll scratch down the window with my hand like one of the Evil Dead and just give him a quick scare. It'll be funny. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, how stupid can you be? It's juvenile, it's pointless, hell, it's dangerous. But as I look out at all of your faces, I take comfort in knowing that I'm not the only one who survived a youthful indiscretion that should have landed him in jail or killed him. Right? I know there are some stories in this room. Let me continue with mine. It was after about 9:30 one night, and I'm over in his neighborhood, and I parked the car a couple of blocks up the road, and I got out of the car, and I quietly walked down the street. And I see his house, and there was one light on in the house, and it was his bedroom light. It was on. So I walked over the curb, and I got on the grass, and I went over to the window. And I reached up with my hand, and I dragged my fingernails down the screen. Immediately, his bedroom light went off, and I saw a hand brush the curtain away, like he was trying to see what was out there. Obviously, he saw it was me, and I'm out there laughing and totally cracking up. Aren't I funny? Ha ha. And I walk around to the front door where I'm waiting for him, Steve, to walk out, and we're going to have a great laugh about the whole thing. Problem is, when the door opened, it wasn't Steve, it was his dad, and his dad was holding a shotgun. He hadn't recognized me when he looked out the window. He didn't know it was me. My little stunt had genuinely scared him. I mean, it would scare anybody. Home, in your room, in your bedroom, or it's safe, and all of a sudden someone scrapes down your window. You know, I always share this. It's like, I could have died that night. You always make it very dramatic, you know. But the truth is, I mean, I got off with a tongue lashing, and later on it did become kind of a funny story that we would tell at parties. But I can't help but wonder about that night in my life. How might that have played out in the culture of social media that we have today, right? Where a 10-second video clip of any of that could go viral like that. What if a neighbor had caught footage of me traipsing around the yard without knowing that we were buddies and schoolmates and that we loved horror movies and that we had a long history and that we both loved pranks, without having any of the backstory or context? If they just saw this dude go up to his window and scratch on his window and his dad comes out with a gun, and if they'd been there with phone video and they just uploaded it to Twitter and that had gone viral, would people really know what was going on? How long would that have followed me and my reputation as a Christian broadcaster, as a video producer, certainly as an atheist activist? Anybody and everybody who wanted to tarnish my reputation, anybody who ever wanted to see me destroyed, could use that. Bloggers would have a field day. They would write articles, trespassing in terror, an atheist's predatory past. There would be a Twitter hashtag that would go viral, secular stalker. And of course, because it's my home state, we'd see it in publications and newspapers. Oklahoma Republicans say shotguns save lives. That would happen almost immediately. It might be branded onto me and my reputation forever. A permanent scarlet letter, if you will. Okay? You think it's humiliating looking at it? I posed for that damn photo. That's how far I go for comedy. I'm here for you. I have a stepdaughter. Her name's Hannah. She's precious. And as she was growing up, we kept telling her to be careful. Be careful, be careful, be careful, be careful. Not just what you post, but what you let other people post about you. Because hers is the first generation that from her birth to now has had pretty much every microsecond of her life documented on social media. You know, it used to be like, where are those baby pictures? But when she was born, we already had digital pictures. We already had social media. She's of that generation. Be careful what you do. Be careful what you post. Be careful what you allow to post it out there, because it will always be there. The internet never forgets. And you may have to explain all of this stuff to friends, maybe the person you marry or live with, coworkers, potential employers. It might cost you a job. Even total strangers will judge you based on this tiny little event that happened at some point in your past. It has never been easier in the social media verse to tar and feather someone, and often it's done for sport. How did we get here? Everything you do has the potential to become somebody's viral video or clickbait or revenge or whatever. Some people just wait around. They just wait around for you to do something human, to make a mistake, to speak or act imperfectly so that they can jump up and say, aha. Here's an interesting story. And you guys follow the Liam Neeson debacle that happened recently? If you're not familiar with it, I'll spell it out quickly, okay? Because it's an interesting case study in how the social media courtroom works and how we as skeptics might be able to approach it. He was essentially pronounced guilty of racism. Public appearances were canceled. Some people wanted him digitally removed from the up-and-coming Men in Black movie that he stars in. They're like, he's a terrible person, he's a racist, delete, 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 delete. Let's go and erase him from the film, he doesn't deserve to be seen. He was out on a press junket. He was promoting his film released in February called Cold Pursuit, and they were talking about the motivations of his character. In the film, the character seeks revenge, and he was talking about the true story in his life from 35 years ago when a friend of his was raped by a black man. And he was talking to The Independent about this story, and he said, for maybe a week, he was just lurking around hoping some black bastard would come out of a pub and have a go at me about something, you know, so that I could kill him. He said that, and this story exploded. And people divided. They divided about these horribly racist ideas and things that he had said and done 35 years ago. Does his confession about then make him a racist now? And how do we, as seekers of truth and evidence-based livers, how do we approach it? Does it matter when he says it was horrible and horrible, awful, when he thinks back and talked about how he'd evolved past those tremendously awful and racist times to try to be better today? Does it matter when Whoopi Goldberg, who knows him, says he's not a bigot? She's no stranger to bigotry and racism. Does it matter when Trevor Noah says, you know, he should be commended for at least being honest about it? Trevor admitted that he's kind of problematic. He's a flawed guy. He's far from perfect, but he's not the devil. Should he be given credit? There are some people who protest now that because I am a white male, that I'm simply coming to his defense because I'm a white male. But can I, as a white male, still be a seeker of truth? Am I disqualified from navigating the circumstances to find out what the hell really happened? They're trying to say, I'm making him a victim, and I'm really not. They're trying to say, I'm letting him off the hook for using a press tour to tell this story. What a terrible platform to do that. It should have been done elsewhere. It's a discussion worth having, but not here. Does it matter that he was the product of Northern Ireland, a very violent time and place? At that time, he was informed by this culture, and he, again, evolved out of it. We talk about the judgment of Liam Neeson by what we term woke culture. I did a recent broadcast with psychologist and author Dr. Valerie Tirico. If you don't know what woke refers to, it means progressives who have awoken to the idea that oppression is the key concept explaining the structure of society, the flow of history, and virtually all of humanity's woes. Now, I have to stop here and say that I know that institutionalized and systemized racism exists. I know that institutionalized misogyny and sexism exist. I know that those things are real, but they aren't blanket answers to all of our questions. They don't absolve people of personal responsibility. You can't solve everything with the idea of wokeness. Sarah Haider, she's an ex-Muslim from Pakistan and has an amazing capacity for fairness. She went online right after this debacle. This was on the 8th of February, and she said, "Unfortunate lessons from Liam Neeson debacle." And with her permission, I'll share the tweets here. This was a brutally frank analysis on what was happening in our culture. She said, "If you're human enough to make a mistake, do not also be stupid enough to share the mistake with the outside world. Do not expect circumstance, evolution in character, or contrition to save you from the fury of the mob." Tips on surviving unscathed: 1, be perfectly woke, even according to behavioral standards not yet set. The future, too, will come for you. If you fail to reach this standard, not to worry. What really matters is managing appearances. Wokeness is performance above all. 2, do everything possible to erase evidence of bad behavior. Hope no offense archaeologist comes to dig through your past. Delete, delete, delete. Erase the memory even from your own mind. You've only ever been faultless. As such, you can feel righteous in hunting others. I'm reminded of the recent controversy with Kevin Hart. He was scheduled to slated to host the Oscars. He's a hugely talented comedian. Somebody trotted through 10 years of Twitter posts and found that a decade ago he'd said some awful and homophobic things. They brought it to light. The Oscars said, "Sorry, you're disinvited." By the time they reconsidered, he said, "I wasn't interested." It was just insanity. Does anyone really think that this guy, he actually admitted he had evolved past those bad ideas, but no one bothered to even ask the question. They just saw 10-year-old tweets, dragged him out, put a spotlight on him and said, "Bad person, we now reject you from society." Is this what we have become? Lastly, point fingers at others as much as possible. Every minute the mob's attention is diverted to another witch is a minute you can breathe easy. Be sure you never try to intervene in an unjust attack, lest you become the target of suspicion yourself. And she finishes with, "Whether the woke crowd wants these to be the lessons we learn from this is irrelevant. This is what will come out, not more correct behavior, not more honesty, but more cover-ups, more hypocrisy, more witch hunts. Is this what justice looks like?" And it's a fair question. We see there's a kind of purity culture online that is dogmatic to the point of looking like my old fundamentalist religion. There are a lot of similarities in the way many of these sort of purity testers are acting. If you and I have come out of religion, we see that there's the righteous versus the unrighteous, the good versus the evil. You can have original sin or inherited guilt, and you're paying for the sins of your fathers and forefathers. They have their own orthodoxies. Denial is proof, meaning the more you say, I'm not, you're misrepresenting me. This is not who I am. You got it wrong. The more you protest, the more that you confirm that you are worthy of their derision. They have absolutely binary thinking, A, B, yes, no, black, white. No room for nuance. There's a shit ton of shaming and shunning of other human beings, a ton of hypocrisy as they're not looking at the problems in their own very human lives, and they love to gloat about the fate of the wicked. They love to dance on the ashes. Just a few days ago, Chelsea Clinton's confronted by a student, a New York University student. Just out of the blue, the student happened to be rolling cell phone video, implicating her for spreading the Islamophobia that informed or helped to inform the New Zealand mass killing of 50 people, blaming Chelsea Clinton partially for the death of 50 in New Zealand. Chelsea Clinton had publicly criticized Minnesota Representative Omar for anti-Semitic remarks. Chelsea's husband is himself Jewish. And Omar's a Somali-American Muslim who had said that U.S. support for Israel was nothing more than a cash grab. This was a play on the trope that it's the Jews controlling all the money kind of thing. So she just went on Twitter and she said, you're an elected official. You should not traffic in anti-Semitism. And for that, this student from New York University just accosted her at random in a hallway and said, essentially, you're responsible for the death of 50 in New Zealand because you are spreading Islamophobia. That clip went instantly viral. Now, I don't follow Chelsea Clinton. I don't know much about her, but I will say that her response was heroic. She was generous, she was compassionate, she was kind, she was deferential. She said the words, I'm sorry, I genuinely do care, and she made you feel like she meant it. I became more of a Chelsea Clinton fan in that moment. Now, because I don't have enough hate mail, let's talk about one more controversial subject before I kind of flip things a little bit and leave you with something that's more encouraging, and then we'll do a little Q&A or some comments if there's anything you would like to add, and I certainly welcome your input today. Anybody remember this? You feel that? Right? You feel that? That is why it's so difficult for us to find real understanding in the Twitterverse, and why some of my fellow liberals ain't helping. Here's a quick recap if you're not familiar with what happened here. This Twitter account here, Talia 2025, posted a 1-minute clip of a group of students from Covington Catholic School and this kid in front, Nick Sandmann. And they're smirking in their MAGA hats right in front of a Native American veteran, this guy right here, Nathan Phillips. At the Lincoln Memorial, this was on the 18th of January. They were there for the March for Life and anti-abortion rally, and Phillips was there for an Indigenous Peoples rally, okay? The story went viral almost immediately. Almost immediately. People saw that 60-second clip, and you want to know what the reaction was? I have it right here. For many of us who are proud liberals, this is understandable. There's a lot to be upset about. There was a guy, he's a reporter for GQ, Nate Friedman. He went on Twitter immediately and said, dox them all. Dox those kids, dox their parents, dox the teachers. If you don't know what doxing is, it's to go and find personal information about people, usually with malice. You go find where they live, you find out where their parents live, you find out their home phone numbers, their cell numbers, where they go to school, where their kids go to school. You find out all that stuff and you put it out there online so the vultures can descend. It's a form of social punishment, really. It's really a threat. To his credit, he went back and deleted the tweet and apologized. He said he posted it in a rage, and he was very sorry that he did it. He said he was angry. But the outrage was shared by a great many people. Covington High School got death threats, closed for several days. Sandmann, he got death threats, so did his parents. And while the left was losing its mind, the right took about 3 seconds to lose its mind as well. Donald Trump jumps all over it. Nick Sandmann and the students of Covington have become symbols of fake news and how evil it can be. They're heroes out there marching for life, essentially. By the way, when I pulled out and screenshotted this tweet from Donald Trump, it reminded me that I have a free plug-in for Chrome. And you can download this that transforms the font of any Trump tweet to a child's handwriting. If we must endure Trump tweets, this is the way to do it. And you can download it for free, okay. So you got the religious right over here screaming about the loony left, and everyone's got their own narrative, and very few of us had any real understanding of what exactly was going on. What the hell's going on? I did a speech last year that talked about the difference between having information and perspective. Right? We have information, but do we have enough information to have perspective? But for some, if you take a second, if you take a breath and start to look around and go, okay, what happened? Who were the players? What were the circumstances? If you start to ask those kinds of questions, that seems to them like a kind of moral sellout, an acquiescence. You're a coward. You should be jumping all over this. Why are you hesitating? Are you in collusion with the enemy? You must be garbage. But if we are pledged to pursue the truth and we don't want to be led around by the nose, by our emotions all the time, these questions matter. What happened? Where was it? Who was involved? What prompted it? What were the results? I want to find out. I want to know about the other pieces of the puzzle, like the Black Hebrew Israelites. This is a tiny group of people that was there at the Lincoln Memorial that day. They're a small sect of people. They think they're the direct descendants of the 12 tribes of Israel, and they are hostile. Confrontation is their calling card, and they went there for the purpose of confrontation. You can see, I don't know, it's kind of hard to see, but here's one of their posters, very much end times. That's, I guess, the Antichrist. This is the devil, and everybody's worshiping a false god or an idol, and they just scream at people, okay? They were telling the indigenous people there, they accosted them and said the reason that they lost their land is because they were worshiping everything except for the correct God. They deserved to have their lands taken away because they were idol worshipers, and they were just screaming at them, okay? Now, I'm going to play a couple of video clips for you. There is some language in it. I've bleeped out the N-word because, frankly, I don't want it in my presentation. We get it. We know what they said, okay? But I want you to be able to see what happened for context, and then we'll discuss quickly, okay? So this is the Black Hebrew Israelites, and they are having it out with a group from the indigenous people, okay?
You talk like that because listen, you a $5 Indian. You go out there to $5 Indian. You ain't no China God. You are the devil. You a fake damn $5 Indian.
That's right.
Go that way. You're not
That's
out.
right.
Stop trying. You always want to take our culture.
That's right.
Just like the white man.
That's
he
right.
wants to be the Egyptians.
That's right.
He wants to be the Israelites.
Right.
He wants to be everybody. Here go this damn demon. So, because you blow a ram horn doesn't make you our people.
And that's right.
You're a damn culture vulture.
That's right.
You're a culture vulture. No all nations. You're a damn blue-eyed demon.
This reminds me of a lot of what happens on Twitter, actually. It's just... Does anybody budge? Okay. So anyway, the indigenous peoples march participants, they move. And then the Black Hebrew Israelites move in toward more of the nucleus of the protests. And you can see the Covington kids are coming into the periphery. They're coming into the periphery to watch, okay? Did you see them in the back?
Won't y'all come up and ask a question, Billy? Don't stand to the side and mock. Bring y'all crack ass up here and make a statement. They got a statement, Salakia, Ma. Yeah. Tell them come over here in the lion's den instead of mocking over there.
All right, so the kids turn around and they split and they go back to their little whatever they're at. So now the Black Hebrew Israelites move in on them.
Hey, look at all these damn peckerwoods. This is what the Lord is coming for.
All these peckerwoods with America, make America great. This want to talk that garbage about what you want to do. Look at all these dusty ass crackers with that racist garbage on. Look at these dirty ass crackers. Can't stand in the damn sun for 5 minutes.
Why you don't build the damn wall?
All right, now kids are sitting there going, what the hell, what's going on here, you know? And then you've got Nathan Phillips, he walks in from the right.
That's right. Here come Gad. Here come Gad. Here come Gad. Look at our Make America Great Again hats. Look at the hats. Look at the hats. We ain't taking. Look, we not taking. Look at Gad. That's right, Gad.
The full video is like 1 hour and 40 minutes long. Does that 56-second clip, does that one image begin to tell the story of what happened on that day? Originally posted by an account that CNN discovered via investigation was a fake Twitter account, and they suspended the account, but not before the video clip had been seen 2.5 million times and shared over 14,000 times, picked up by major media outlets all around the world. I'm interested in how we approach this image because, again, as a liberal progressive who despises Trump and the whole MAGA phenomenon and knows so much of the damage that's done by the culture this kids come from, it ticks a lot of the boxes for outrage for me in my personal life and maybe for you as well, right? The kids are product of the Catholic Church, essentially a criminal organization that's been preaching lies, denying human rights, protecting rapists, and abusing power pretty much since its inception. He's a MAGA Trump supporter. He endorses the jaw-dropping awfulness that is Donald J. Trump. They're there to participate in the March for Life. Essentially, it's a march against abortion. They are there to take away the rights of women, the rights of bodily autonomy. And then there's that smirk. Just want to reach up and just smack it off his face. Do you ever feel just, right? It's an emotional reaction. Add the fact that his family hired a PR firm and is now in the middle of these massive multi-million-dollar lawsuits against entities like the Washington Post. And now it's war. It's war. It's war on Nick Sandmann and the Catholic Church and the opportunists, and they're all sexist and racist and white supremacists and the KKK. We lose our minds. And here we are, we're back here again, right? He's garbage, he's trash, they're all trash, fuck them all, blah, 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 right? Now, if I try to talk about anything other than the kid wearing the hat, if I tried to talk about all the other pieces of the puzzle, when I would go online, I would notice that if I drifted out of this okay zone, these people over here, when we talked about the other parts of the story, would just immediately flip because they weren't interested in any of the other details. You know, I stepped out of the safe zone. I wasn't in the green zone anymore. You know, I'm off message. I'm not talking about what they want to talk about. Maybe I'm just blinded by my privilege, or maybe I'm a sympathizer. You know, look at him. He's not losing his mind. He's not as upset as we are about it. You know, maybe he's in collusion with them. Maybe he sympathizes with them. And before you know it, now we're back to that binary righteous mind thing. You know what I think is really suspect about that whole debacle? This is the truth. I'm shocked that it was considered news in the first place. You know what was going on right around the time that this little standoff happened at the Lincoln Memorial? You know what was going on? Our government was freaking shut down. 800,000 people were furloughed that month. 4 days before Covington, 32,000 Los Angeles teachers went on strike. There were 600,000 students that didn't have a classroom to go to. 3 days before Covington, there was a bomb that went off. A terrorist act in Kenya killed 21. The CDC had just released a report saying that the influenza virus was on the uprise, and they issued alerts. The same day as Covington, there was a pipeline in Mexico that blew, 91 people dead. The day after Covington was the genuinely historic Women's March, which took place in hundreds of cities all around the world. That's news. This is not news. I agree with Josh Rothman up at the New Yorker. He called it a pseudo-event. He said, you know, only a few dozen people were actually involved. No violence occurred. The climax of the so-called confrontation was an enigmatic staring contest, which after a few minutes ended of its own accord. A few people stared at each other on the National Mall, and people lost their minds. Somebody on my Facebook page, when I was saying this very thing, he was kind of taking my side by being tongue-in-cheek, but he posted, he said, you know who else smirked? The Nazis. We've always been a species of tribes. We look at evolutionary psychology and we see that there was utility in being tribes. But how often is that starting to work against us? And then you get into this weird binary thing where if you're wrong, you're bad. If you're bad, you're trash. How often have we decided that posting something online is actually a good excuse not to have to do anything real or tangible about a problem? I mean, maybe we think we're activists, but sometimes in my own life, I've been guilty of being a slacktivist. Oh, I shared it. I'm a concerned citizen. I've done my social duty. Good me, pass the salt. Sometimes I make things worse by doing so. The Times wrote a recent op-ed with Arthur Brooks. It was talking about how the problem today isn't really necessarily incivility or intolerance. We live in a culture of contempt for our fellow human beings. He mentioned a 2014 study by the National Academy of Sciences that talked about something called motive attribution asymmetry. Essentially, each side thinks it's driven by benevolence, while the other side is evil and motivated by hatred and is therefore an enemy with whom one cannot negotiate or compromise. Us good, them evil. That's Twitter 80% of the time. But what if, my friends, we had not fueled this hamster wheel of viral virtue, you know? What if we'd had a little patience and maturity and consideration and we'd paused? What if we hadn't gotten distracted and made this story go hugely public? It's a given. Nobody would even really know who this kid is. The event would have come and gone with a blink. He certainly wouldn't have had the opportunity to file multi-million-dollar lawsuits and potentially cash in. In that way, we as a society are actually partially responsible because we sort of set him up to be able to do it. Shit, what were we thinking? I'll go a step further. There's a lot I dislike about this kid, but I don't want to see his life destroyed. You want to know why? Nick Sandmann's a kid. Misguided, indoctrinated, I think very much in the wrong on a lot of key issues. This is not Hitler, okay? He ain't the boogeyman. He's a kid. And honestly, if I'm going to be totally transparent with you, when I look at this face, I look at that guy, I look at the 18-year-old, I flash back to another 18-year-old, myself. That's not a mullet, it's a bi-level, by the way. It's a bi-level. Look, that's me at 18, right? Product of a Christian home, product of a religious high school, Bible literalist, student leader, Christian activist. We would go out and march for the unborn, which is how we phrased it. Spokesperson for Youth for Christ. I'd assumed my parents' political views. They were William F. Buckley conservatives, Ronald Reagan conservatives, today in their 80s, still with us. They are Fox News conservatives. I simply inherited their beliefs and parroted them as my own. I didn't associate with non-Christians. I didn't really know anybody who disagreed with me. I hadn't seen the world. I was a bubble boy. This cocky teenage Seth, who was so privileged to have been born in the right religion, in the right region, at the right time. I had all the answers without even really understanding the questions. That kid might have been there in D.C., marching for what I thought was the unborn, those who could not speak for themselves or defend themselves, and I would have felt like I was on the cause of right. I'm not trying to let him totally off the hook. What I'm saying is, I see him promoting bad ideas, but also because I don't live in a binary universe, I also see him as a victim of bad ideas, just like I was. And ideas can be changed. So unlike the social media mob, I don't want to ruin Nick Sandmann. I want to reach him. Because if I was ultimately reachable, maybe he is. I'm not willing to give up on the black Hebrew Israelites either. You know, they've got some pretty toxic ideas and rhetoric. But I want to do battle in the arena of ideas because the people that they're accosting aren't just the victims, they're victims too. They're victims of bad ideas. Their lives are just as ruined and wasted as they could possibly be. I'll bet Nathan Phillips isn't Hitler. I'll bet he's a pretty good guy. A flawed human being, a complex person who, if you sat down, might have a wonderful conversation. I don't know. More than any of that these days when I log on, I feel like John Coffey in one of my favorite films, The Green Mile, when he says, mostly I'm just tired of people being ugly to each other. You ever feel that? People like to say that kindness is weakness. What a bunch of crap that is. You know, that having dialogue is some sort of moral surrender. What a bunch of crap that is. All I know, I tell you, this is not working. We're seeing it minute by minute, second by second on every other page or every other thread, and nobody's saying, you know what, you're absolutely right, I am an asshole. And I was absolutely wrong, and I publicly reversed my position. Thank you for correcting me publicly. And all of my tribe is going to change their minds as well. This has been a wonderful, teachable moment. You know, have a nice day. Does that ever happen? Of course not. Now, please hear me. I am not saying that we're supposed to hold hands with the freaking KKK, all right? Okay? Because I know some people are going to knee-jerk that direction. Or we should be soft. or we should excuse or not fight the good fight. I'm not making the both sides argument that Trump made after Charlottesville. I'm not remotely. We're not talking about ideas here. I'm talking about attitudes. I'm not saying that the left and the right are equivalent. I'm a proud liberal. I don't think that the positions of the left and the right are equivalent, not by a long shot. I don't think that religious and humanist ideas are equivalent. I'm not making an equivalence argument. The racist and the non-racist, they're not equivalent, okay? I don't think we should be silent. I love Christopher Hitchens. It was a speech from him that changed my life. And he said it perfectly. Never be a spectator of unfairness or stupidity. The grave will supply plenty of time for silence is a great way to finish that quote. Can you think of a guy who was stronger than Christopher Hitchens? But did he lose his mind and throw things and have a little shit fit online? Did he lose himself emotionally? Did he lose control of his sort of emotional faculties when he was giving other people what we affectionately know now as the hitch slap? Did he do that? No. He would go into the enemy camp. He'd go talk to almost anybody. He would do debates inside churches. He was never anything but courteous, but can you say he was weak? Absolutely not. I'm not saying that we sit on our hands or mute our voices or be spectators to unfairness or stupidity. I'm not saying that mockery doesn't have its place, because on the grand stage, sometimes it does. It feels good to roast some sacred cows. It feels, and it's not just necessary to mock those who take themselves way too seriously. I always like the bald Trump image. I don't know why, it just makes me laugh all the time. I'm not saying privilege doesn't exist. I know it exists. I'm not saying that I'm not someone who has enjoyed privilege in my own life. I know I have. I know. I'm a Western white male. I get it. I'm not denying the reality that there's a famine of fairness in this world. I know there is. And I'm not saying that there aren't legitimate times to be outraged, because there are. But not everyone who disagrees with us is a villain, okay? And baiting them or insulting them or rallying against them on Twitter doesn't necessarily make us a hero either. Sometimes I think people like to create villains because they want to feel like a hero, right? We're always this guy, caps locking to emphasize my rage, shouting, screaming, pounding, baiting, insulting, vilifying. We become this sort of broken, irritating noise, this broken car alarm people just stop hearing. People just stop hearing us. And it cheats the genuine moments when we do need to raise our voices and get noticed, because we're always shouting and people stop listening. Another way that I like to say this is that if everything is an outrage, nothing is. So let's measure our steps. Let's take a breath. Let's take a breath. Sometimes we're looking at a little bit of a longer game. I like the Indy 500 analogy. You think Indy 500 winners win the race by ramming the accelerator full bore to the floor for the entire freaking race? Of course not, because if they did, they'd immediately smash into the wall, catch on fire, and blow it for everybody racing around them, right? The Indy 500 winners win a 500-mile race by knowing when to slow down to take the turn. Beyond that, life's too short and too amazing and too beautiful to spend every day like that. Isn't it? We've forgotten the good stuff. We've become these sort of keyboard mashing malcontents staring at a two-dimensional screen, and we're not living the precious moments that we have in this world. I love this book by Jonathan Haidt, The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. And it talks about the processes of the human brain and how we develop our moral opinions and how emotions are involved. It's really interesting stuff. He gets into a rider-elephant analogy. He talks about how emotional appeals can actually be good or bad. And that's counterintuitive to skeptics because we get weird about emotion. He talks about how emotion can actually help us. Are we being moral or just moralistic? And the different types of disagreements to change minds. There's another great resource, too, by Dr. Lakoff called Don't Think of an Elephant. Know Your Values and Frame the Debate. And he's a progressive, and he's talking about how we can frame conversations with conservatives to have actual discourse and potentially change minds. Now notice that the subtitle of his book is not Know Your Values and Burst into Flames on Twitter, right? Frame the debate. I'm not saying everybody can be reached. I'm not stupid. I get it. Some people are beyond help. But the next time you think of even an extreme case, somebody who was the worst person, who held the worst of ideas and committed the worst of actions, I hope you'll take inspiration from a story I'm about to tell you quickly about Brian Widener. He was a skinhead since he was 14 years old. He's a white supremacist extremist. He founded a racist hate group in Indiana. That group grew to have 8 chapters in 6 states by 2007. He was violent, and so was the group. You did not want to run into this group if you were non-white or not part of their white supremacist culture, or even a rival group. They will mess you up, they will hurt you, they will do permanent damage to you. And he had the tattoos on his face. These are racial and violent tattoos all over him. This is how all in he was. 13 years ago, his son was born. And as in the back of his mind, he'd been looking at this white supremacist group, and he began to see the hypocrisy, and he began to feel the lack of satisfaction he was getting by hating all the time. And then he saw his precious young boy, and he realized that this is not what I want for him. He had a moment of epiphany. Someone who many declared was beyond reach. Write him off, he's garbage. He had an epiphany, he had a moment of epiphany, and realized that he couldn't do it, and he left the group, and he left a culture of hate. He walked away. But he was trapped in this shell that was covered with violent and racist symbols. What was he going to do? The shell on the outside did not match the changed heart on the inside. Well, thanks to the Southern Poverty Law Center and a generous grant of about $35,000, he went in for tattoo removal surgery. It took 25 separate procedures, unbelievably painful procedures that burned him to blistering. You can see the blisters here. His eyes would swell shut. They would ooze liquid. They were throbbing with pain. He was miserable. 25 separate procedures over 1 year and a half. This is Brian Widener today. His story is part of a Netflix documentary. You should look it up. It's called Erasing Hate, and it documents the process of him going through this removal, his new life. He walked away from hatred. Yeah, it's one story. Yeah, okay, fine. Okay, it's one story. I'll take that. There were people who might have given up on him, written him off. But his life is an example of what's possible when love wins. This guy's name is Christian Picciolini, former neo-Nazi. One day he was beating a black man, beating him so violently. And he made eye contact. This is according to his story. He made eye contact with the man, and the man looked at him, and they had a human connection. And the skin color disappeared, and they saw each other eye to eye as human beings, and he felt shame and real horror at what he had been doing, and he walked away. And he founded a group called Life After Hate, a nonprofit that counsels members of hate groups and works to disengage them from those hate cultures. There's this woman, Dia Khan, on the right. There's a documentary that she has produced called White Right, Meeting the Enemy. She is a Muslim immigrant woman. She went into the homes of skinheads to get them on camera and talk to them one-on-one. And it's fascinating, because for many of these guys, it's the first time they've ever seen a humanization of the other. They don't know any immigrants. They don't know any Muslims. They don't know any others. So it's easy to vilify and demonize them, but she's sitting on the couch right in front of him, and she says, "Am I your enemy?" It's amazing to watch the reaction. One guy shuts down. He can't even find language, and he has to stop. He has to stop. This guy was involved in the documentary. Ken Parker got a swastika on his chest. He was violent, hateful man, hateful man. A few months after he was interviewed by Diacon, the film came out, he contacted her and he had said he couldn't do it and he left the group. He wants to be associated no more with hate. These examples are extreme, okay, I get that. But I'm trying to prove a point of what is possible. And I'll bet this room is filled with stories of people who have, at one point in their lives, had really bad ideas or done something really bad or stupid or shitty or whatever. And you realized it and you had that moment of epiphany and you said, tomorrow I'm going to be better. I'm going to do better. Sometimes in life we have to burn a bridge, but I'll tell you, it feels so much better to build one. Sometimes we got to curse the darkness, but it feels so much better to shine some light. Sometimes we do have to defeat an enemy, but it feels so much better to develop an ally. Ultimately, we have to remember we are talking to people, many of them damaged people, many of them indoctrinated people. Not just Twitter handles and avatars, not just two-dimensional images that cross our smartphones and laptops. And as we work for a better world, let's try to reconnect with each other as people. And we don't have to be of the same skin color or background or religion or whatnot to do this. Somebody memed a quote that I did, I think a couple of years ago. I said, you don't have to be someone else to learn from, empathize with, support, and or be an advocate for them. You know, I don't have to be a female to advocate for the rights of women to have bodily autonomy. I don't have to be a Muslim to advocate for the rights and the protection of Muslims oppressed by radical Islam. I don't have to be you to be an advocate for you. My best friend came out to me as gay in the mid-1990s. I was a huge homophobe when I was a Christian high school student. But today, even though I'm hetero, I can stand shoulder to shoulder with him at a pride parade and be his advocate. I do not have to be him to support him and stand by him. And that's how we should begin to approach each other. I reject these purity tests. I reject them. This narrow conduit through which we're supposed to see complex issues, I'm done. All the reasons why I can't or I shouldn't or I'm not right or it's not the person or I didn't pass some subjectively imposed test that someone over here says I have to pass before I may or I can. I believe what Ingersoll said. I think we rise by lifting others. And in doing so, let's provide that example of love and goodness that can bring humanity together to achieve great things. Thank you all very much for having me today. We have a few moments before we have the potluck and a meet and greet and before you buy everything at my table. Anybody have a comment or question? You're welcome to grab the mic here. By the way, questions have a question mark at the end of them, okay? They have question marks at the end. But if you want to contribute, challenge, if you want to be a part of the conversation, I really do welcome it, okay?
What's your personal advice for reaching people?
Reaching people?
Yeah.
How do you fix the world is what you're asking me.
I don't know about the world, but...
I get you.
One person?
Okay, this may be, give me 2 minutes to try to unpack this, okay? Thank you for the question. When I first came out of the faith, I used a lot of mockery. You know, Jesus is Santa Claus for adults and that kind of stuff in my one-on-ones. And people just went into defensive mode and they never changed their minds. And I felt so frustrated. One-on-one, person-to-person, I don't start with beliefs. I don't walk into a religious person's house with my, Jesus on a pogo stick t-shirt or whatever, I don't do things to unnecessarily provoke. We start by being human beings and finding what we may have in common. It's easier to connect as human beings if we don't start with labels, and it's a lot harder to put me in your little box of what the caricature of the atheist is if you got to know me personally and you discovered that you liked me. Hey, Seth's a nice guy. I mean, he loves his wife, and he's one of those dudes. I just think he's moral. I mean, he doesn't fit. Okay, it's a lot harder for them to messes up their categories. It's because we were people first. I think mockery, if it's done, needs to be done on the larger stage, where people in the periphery are watching other people roast the sacred cows without fear. I think it shows them that, it's okay, lightning did not strike me. But one-on-one, I think we must lead with compassion. And set your expectations low. Quite frankly, you are working often against a lifetime of indoctrination, cultural reinforcement, and you can't judge yourself on whether or not you change their mind. I would focus first on you, live a loud, proud, secular life, do the conversations organically when they happen. But it's an uphill battle. If we start by being human, people who can disagree but still connect as people, I think that's where we get into conversations where we have what's called doxastic openness and the walls come down, and that's when minds can be changed. It's a long game. Yes?
Yeah, so I'm an atheist YouTuber and full-time activist. I'm a genetically modified skeptic. I don't know if anybody...
Ladies and gentlemen, genetically modified skeptics here!
I didn't expect anyone to recognize me. But thank you. So I criticize problems that I see within Islam, and largely because I see a lot of Muslims as being oppressed by some really draconian, hyper-conservative ideas. And I'm open to criticizing what I think should be criticized, regardless of kind of superficial labels of like race and gender. And I see that, yeah, because I'm like a straight white cis dude, like people say that you can't do that, that's not okay. Or they'll say because I'm an atheist YouTuber, and that there have been some atheist YouTubers in the past that have gone really far to a toxic place that I don't want to be associated with, because I'm in that part of that, I'm in that group, I can't talk about this. Like I want to create social change and progress. I mean, sometimes I'm not even allowed to speak at certain atheist groups because they say all atheist YouTubers are not welcome here, and that breaks my heart, because I just want to do the same thing that you want to do, and what everybody in this room would want to do. And so how do you break out of this category that someone puts you in before they understand you?
I used to worry a lot about what people told me I could and couldn't do and say. But after the equity that I have with this community and the relationship that we had, I've been in a position where I'm fortunate enough to be able to say, I'm going to do it anyway. And people will always find reasons why you can't or you shouldn't. And I always come back to we're human beings first, and I care. When Raha was in the Bangkok hotel with a barricade against her door, and her uncle said, I'm going to cut your head off. We're going to kill you. We're coming for you. And she was on Twitter saying, please, somebody save me. And we are getting the word out and saying, please, everybody notice this, notice this, notice this. Do you think she might have stumbled upon my retweet and said, oh shit, he's a white cis male? No. There's a fellow human being who cares. He's on my side. He's on my page. It's easy to say and harder to do, but I don't spend my time worrying much about what the can't crowd says I'm able to do. I do it anyway. And they can throw whatever invective they want in your direction. I like that saying that says it's not what you're called, it's what you answer to. And as an activist and someone that I've come to know, if you ever need an advocate or someone who can vouch, you just call me, because I know you and many atheist YouTubers out there are doing great work. You don't deserve to be associated with toxicity. You are changing lives, you are helping people, and you demonstrate daily a positivity and an empathy and compassion that is so desperately needed. It's oxygen in these conversations. So I'll vouch for you, you vouch for me, we'll keep doing what we do. Don't ever let anybody else define what you can and cannot do as an activist. Everybody will tell you that you cannot do it. Yeah.
So I was thinking about what you said early on about what interaction on the internet is like these days. I mean, it's a clash of one in-group against another in-group. very often. And it's not an accident that we call it tribalism, because it's very much like the way we used to live in our early history. When our tribe was the in-group, our tribe was human, and the other tribes, well, less than human. So my question is, can we look at our early history and, you know, how did we go from being tribes in conflict to a larger society in our own history, and can we adapt those lessons to the internet?
I think it's a great rhetorical question. I think it's great.
Yeah.
Honestly, he's right. A lot of the online exchanges are what? You demonstrate strength, you show out strength, you exploit weakness, you conquer. You bring people to your tribe, your group, you then manage the tribe, perhaps even dominate the tribe. All others are out, us, them. There's a book that I narrated the audiobook of, but it's great in text form as well, that speaks to this very thing by evolutionary psychologist Dr. Hector Garcia. He's an instructor in San Antonio. You guys know him? It's called Alpha God. And I read, it's like an 11-hour audiobook. It's called Alpha God. And it talks about all the stuff that we have evolved in our brains to help us survive in the savannah, right? The African savannah, and how it is playing out in constructive and also destructive ways in the year 2019. And it really gets into how gods were constructed. Why are so many of the gods male? Why are so many of them like these sort of violent tyrant type things? You know, they're like Yahweh. You know, love, fear, protection, jealousy, salvation, destruction. And how do these happen? They reflect the culture. They're reflected in our evolutionary psychology. Alpha God is a great teaching tool. Do I think that people in the 280-character Twitterverse are going to want to get into those discussions? Sadly, no. But I think that they're discussions maybe we can get into ourselves, and we can conversationalize them as we're talking to people. You know, there are reasons why we do what we do. And it's not always good, and it's not always rational. What benefited us on the plains of Africa may be hurting us today. So that's a good point. A couple more, and then we'll break bread together as infidels and hellbound heathen.
Hey, Seth. First, I want to say thank you for coming out here, man.
Sure. Nice and loud.
Yeah. So, I guess what I wanted to ask you was I wanted to get your opinion on something, especially with your history. I think that your history in Christian radio kind of gives you a unique view that I think a lot of us who've come out of religion would have. And that is when you gave your example about having messed something up, you know, it's not always so easy as to go, oh, we just misconstrued, you know, the circumstances. Sometimes somebody just messes up.
Yeah.
And it's not always the worst possible thing, but it feels like we're kind of living in a time where these notions that I remember from church, I'm sure you do too, these notions of forgiveness and redemption, you know, are things that I don't know if I see anymore. When you really do, when somebody does mess up, do you think there's room left in this movement for forgiveness and redemption?
Yeah, I think that, you know, the more inflammatory tweets get the press, but I'll bet if we look in this room, I'll bet we see a ton of compassion. I mean, I'm not trying to ingratiate myself to the audience. I'm just saying that this is real life. So we've all had an argument with our spouse and said something that we regretted and thought, oh shit, I was angry and I hurt her and I'm so sorry I said it and I'm so sorry, you know. Or we've all done something and we thought, oh, why did I do that? And someone has turned around to us and said, it's okay. And they wrap their arms around us and we heal and we take steps to do better tomorrow. And I think that's just life. You know, Twitter's not life. Facebook's not life. It can be a reflection of life. But I have found, honestly, I found less judgment and more compassion in groups like these than I ever found in church. So I'm not giving up. You know?
I love that. Yeah. Thank you.
For what it's worth. All right, go ahead.
Hey, Seth. I wanted to get your advice about something. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about, I guess, death. I shouldn't be. I'm pretty young still, but my parents are getting a little bit older, and I wanted to get your advice about how to, I guess, better prepare for them to pass. I know being religious, I was always had that hope of seeing them again once they passed, but that's no longer there for me. So, what's
Are
your
your parents religious? I mean, I'm just curious.
My mom is somewhat, but she's not not hardcore.
She believe in heaven and all that?
She believes in an afterlife, but she doesn't really believe in a deity.
I get it. Yeah, it's kind of a casual, I think there's something out there and it's good kind of deal. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a little bit above my pay grade. I'd be terrified of giving you the wrong advice. I can only tell you in my own life that it's weird. I fear death so much less. I don't fear death at all. But when I was a believer in heaven, I did. Isn't that weird? Did anybody else feel that? Like when I thought I was going to live forever and have a mansion and we were going to be supermen and superwomen and all those types of things, and I was terrified of death. Mm-hmm. It was only when I realized that I live a finite life and the universe doesn't care if I exist and I assign my own purpose and it is what it is and seize the moments and it can still be beautiful. It was only then that my fear of death went away. It's bizarre. I would frame life and death like this, and I hear this from apologists who come at me all the time. Like, well, if it's not eternal, why bother? And I'm like, this is a delicious chicken dinner right here. Delicious. There's a final bite to this meal. Do you think we should probably not eat it? That's my favorite piece of music, my favorite song. There will be a final note, and the song's over. Should I not bother listening to it? I may love someone who dies before I do, and I lose them in that way. Is the love not worth having? No, it's absolutely worth having. It's even more so worth having. Seize the moments. And if you frame life as a series of moments that can be enjoyed by people who are lucky enough to have been born, then I think that really helps with any thoughts about, death when it comes. And when it comes, it's part of life. But you live to the fullest. Seize the day, okay? All right, one more.
Hi, Seth.
Hi.
So, I have a quick question for you.
All right, hang on.
Oh? Yeah, I know. I'm very sure. So, I have a quick question for you. This is something that's about to happen in a few days when we go back home. My family is actually not very religious. I grew up in a really, really good place, but my boyfriend, his family is extremely religious. And over time, he has become more of an agnostic. He's more open now. His family doesn't know he's here. And they're about to ask questions. And I don't want to put him in a position that will be really bad for him, in which him being with me or with people that are kind of like us would make him have a bad relationship with his family. I don't know if I should help him and talk to his family with him, or if I should let him handle it himself. I feel like he's probably in a bit of a spot in which he's against the wall or against the wall and the sword. How would you tackle this?
All right, where's family? Where do they live?
We're in San Antonio. We're actually not very far. We're like an hour away.
What's their religion?
They are Christian. They used to be Catholic, but they're extremely Christian. Like, his family, his father is very, very religious, kind of homophobe, a little bit of racist as well. They watch Fox News on a daily basis.
And when I hear that, part of me dies inside. I'm just like, oh.
His mom is fantastic. I love her.
Yeah.
But his dad is something else.
This is probably a conversation that we'd have to have over like a long period of time, but I can only tell you about what I think in my own life. The reason it is going to be difficult for him is not because he's not accepting his family. It's because he's afraid that they are not going to accept him. Already they are affording themselves latitude, that they are expecting latitude that they're not giving to him, which creates the culture where he's afraid to say anything, because now it's like, oh God, what's Thanksgiving going to be like? Will they stop calling, or will they call all the time? Am I going to get those texts, those emails? Is mom going to cry? Is she going to spend the rest of her life afraid that I'm going to burn in hell? Blah, blah, blah. I can't tell him whether or not he should come out to his family. I think that's something he has to determine on his own, depending on his parents' age. I will say, though, that it would be a crime, I think, for him not to live an authentic life because he was living by the expectations put upon him by a religious family. Families have this weird thing where it's like, that's not how I raised you. That's not how I raised you. Meaning that I'm supposed to be an echo of their voice. I'm supposed to be a continuation of their voting habits or their religious worship or whatever. But if he sees himself as a genuinely unique person, then he gets to live life on his own terms and pursue the truth on his own terms and figure it out. And his family shouldn't put him in a position where he should feel like he's the screw-up if he comes to a point of disagreement. Ultimately, whether he decides to come out or not, and I hope he can and does be his authentic self to them, he needs to remember that his life is about boundaries. So if they find out and they will not honor they will not respect his desire to live a truthful life, if they're going to shame and do all those horrible things and be constant forces of negativity. Parent or no parent, sibling or no sibling, child or no child, I'm sorry, they do not have the permission to do that. You can say, you don't have permission to do that. And you can determine, whether or not you let people into your circle based on whether or not they show you respect, right? They wouldn't allow you to go into their wheelhouse and tell them what to think and shame them. They are allowing themselves a latitude that they're not affording to you. They're breaking those rules, a double standard. And if you guys can come to a point where if he can be his authentic self, and even if they disagree, they still say, we love you and we love to see you at Thanksgiving, that's amazing. Respect at the end of the day I think is key. And I would encourage him to give himself permission to live an authentic life. He certainly deserves it because we don't get another, okay?
Thank you.
That speaks to something that I go through in my own. I'll finish with this story. I don't mean to drag this out, but this is kind of a touchy one. My mother and father and I, we don't speak, okay? I mean, you can imagine. Like my parents they met at Oral Roberts University, okay? They honeymooned in Jerusalem. Okay, that's how religious they are. My mother wrote a Greek New Testament study guide. That's how religious they are. Can you imagine how freaking embarrassed they are that I'm here in Austin, Texas at an atheist gathering? They're terrified, they're horrified, they're embarrassed. I'm going to text them right now. Oh, did you? Okay. That's going to need context, right? Information, perspective. Okay, we need to go there. I remember they started off by sort of going into panic mode when I first began to ping them with questions, and then they were desperate and they came at me all the time. And then before you know it, it's like you're going through a midlife crisis, and why can't you just be quiet? You're embarrassing the whole family. And, you're crazy. And I won't even tell you many of the awful things that have come in through text and email, stuff that I never thought I would hear a parent say. And in my own life, I just thought, you don't have permission. You don't. You just don't. You don't get to come into my life and tell me what I am, because you don't define who I am. You don't get to tell me that I'm purposeless and broken and I have no morals and I'm going to burn in hell and all those things. You don't get to do that. And if you can't respect the boundary that I have set, I will then lock you out of my life. It's not what I want, right? The onus is on you. The opportunity is for you. You can decide if you're going to abide by those rules, but if you won't, I'm sorry, but that's it. And every once in a while, every 18 months, like a battered partner, I go back and I'm like, well, maybe it'll be different this time. So I unblock them and we try to have a conversation, and it's about 5 seconds before somebody throws out an aside or they give me a book or say something nasty. So we don't speak. We don't speak. And I will tell you this. that I have discovered, thanks to people like you, that family quite often is the family that you choose. People who act like family, who get you and who have a relationship with you and who look forward to seeing you and who challenge you and who will have your back through thick and thin, that's family. And so to be able to be in a room with people like and have that instant connection with you, and to know that wherever I go, wherever I am, whatever I do, I have the honor of having you as my family. Just know that it means more to me than I can ever say. Thank you all very much.